Welcome, everyone, to the Women in Travel Tourpreneur podcast. My name is Amanda Walkins. I am the Managing Director of the Tourism Marketing Agency, and I am delighted to be joined by a fabulous panel of women today who have very different perspectives and backgrounds and tour operations. So I will pass this along. Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone where you're based?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. I'm Caroline Connor, and I am Wine Dine Caroline. I do luxury wine and food experiences in Lyon, France.
Fantastic. And Carol, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Amanda. I'm Carol El Hawari. I am based in Egypt, and I own and manage Mr. and Mrs. Egypt and literary tours in Egypt.
Fantastic. And Zakia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zakia Mulawigiri, and I run Invisible Cities out of beautiful Edinburgh, Scotland. But we also do walking tours in Glasgow, Manchester, York, and with plans to expand a bit further.
Fantastic. And Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. My name is Mary Collins. I run a food tour company called Blue Fern Travel based in Washington, D.C., and also an international archaeology company called Far Horizons. So thank you.
Very cool. I love that. So what we'll be talking about today is how to craft tours that focus on telling the stories of women specifically. And I personally love this topic. I think, diversifying the stories that we're telling is really important. I think representing underrepresented, stories, whether that's from a women's perspective or any other variety of perspectives, is so important and long overdue in the travel and tourism sector, if I'm honest. So I know that some of you actually run tours that are focused on women in the destination, and maybe some others have recommendations for people that they know that are running that. So basically, I'd love to shout out any tours that you're running or that you know of so that we can sort of uplift those efforts and help them to reach a wider audience as well. So Carol, I know that you have something in Egypt, right? Would you like to tell us about your women-focused?
Yeah, we have a tour called Awesome Egyptian Women, and it serves two purposes. Firstly, to raise the profile of some awesome Egyptian women who don't get much profile, and secondly, to make that this tour is for women only, and it's run completely by women. So there's a female driver, female guide, female host, basically, and some of the women who feature it. It goes right. It's right from 3,000-4,000 years worth of history from Hatshepsut, and ancient Egyptian pharaoh who was a woman and ruled for well over 20 years, right up to a modern female Egyptologist who was the first ever female director of the Egyptian Museum, and she's still alive, so it goes right up to the present day, and and a few in between. So I really like it. It's one of my favorite tours, personally, and we wanted it to be also run by women and all the people on the staff be women, to address a problem we have. Not other countries have this problem too, but perception-wise, Egypt people can think of it as unsafe. So the point was to come on this tour. It's only for women. Everybody's a woman. The host, the guide, the driver are all women. To make you feel perfectly safe. You can come on your own, etc., and you can hear about some awesome Egyptian women. So
I love
it's
that.
in Cairo. It's run in Cairo. It's all based in Cairo. One day in Cairo.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Was that sort of a mission of yours to craft a about women only and for women only tour?
Yes, I can't even remember when I had the idea. I've had it for quite a while, and suddenly the name popped into my head as well, the Awesome Egyptian Women name. And it was quite hard to decide which women to feature on it because a lot of them are ancient Egypt and more modern contemporary women. But the good thing about the tour is that the guide that runs this, so you can talk about. So there are specific women named, but you can talk about lots of other women while you're doing it that were key to Egypt's history. So Yeah, but it's something I very much wanted to do, is to, and in fact, I'm going to do more tours just for women. Yeah.
So are you already seeing that there's, interest and
There's
appetite for this?
definitely, yeah. And I think Egypt has such an opportunity because it's got thousands of years of history. But there were a number of key women in ancient Egyptian history who you'd get totally dominated by the male pharaohs. But there were some real, and it's incredible really when you look back on the history, how many women were significantly important in an extremely patriarchal society. So I'd like to focus on even more of them. Yeah.
I love this. And Zaki, I think you have something sort of similar that you're running in Edinburgh, at least.
Yes, and I think you went on our Women of Edinburgh tour, Amanda, at the very beginning of that.
Yeah.
We have a Women of Edinburgh tour, and also in Manchester, Women of Manchester, very similar, reasoning. And we have, in a city like Edinburgh, more statues of named animals than of named women. And we thought, the lack of representation is absurd, and women are not featured in other maybe mainstream tours or street names, etc. So it came to mind. So I guess, similar to what Carol was saying as well. We train people who have a different experience of the cities, may have experienced homelessness, and for women that means sometimes trauma, domestic abuse, different challenges, complex issues. And one of our trainees, the first time we organized training, said, why don't we learn about the women? Who are the women? Where are they? And why am I hearing about the kings? And and she really wanted to, for a role model purpose, I guess, discover them. And so we did that work together. And then it was a question of empowering our women trainees to see, to find out who the women were and to discuss them and introduce them to the public. And I think what we talk about also on the tour is issues that are related to women. So for us, for example, in the Edinburgh tour now, we talk about period poverty and why that matters and what that is. And in a country like Scotland, who now delivers free period products in schools and in public places and things like that. And so sometimes it's still a bit of a difficult conversation they're like, why are they telling me about periods and why that is, especially when it's an all male kind of, guests. But one of our guides even took it further and had tampons with her on the tour to kind of show, to highlight a company, and was like, this is what they do and this is why it matters. But also we talk about women in homelessness and how different it is than men, etc. So I think being the spokesperson, I think it matters for our guides, but also it matters to me as a women business owner. And I think it's so having that message forward is important. And also it's a really good product to sell because it's quite popular, and people, I think, we have a lot of interest from different groups and different schools, for example, who do want to learn about it, and it's enabled us to have very cool collaborations in the cities. We have a Scottish writer, Sarah Sheridan, who writes historical novels, and she I usually have it here, but I think it's in the other room. She wrote a book called Where Are the Women? And reimagined Scotland if the streets were named after women, if statues were of women and who they could be. So it's not about replacing one for the other, but more highlighting who the Scottish women are. We have a campaign right now around witches of Scotland and rehabilitating them. So kind of, and that enables us to collaborate with these projects, with these people on doing different things in our community. So it was a no-brainer, really. And then over COVID, when tours were not available and we couldn't have anything happen, we also developed a lot of content and merchandise related to our women tours. So for example, we did a wee card game, like a top trump, like that. Each card is a famous woman, and you have a wee blurb about who they are and what they achieved and why we think they're awesome. And that was super popular because people are really demanding that content and are really more and more, definitely more than when I started 5-6 years ago, wanting to have a more diverse kind of overview and have these conversations. So it's also been really beneficial for us. But even now, our male guides really do want to lead. The Women of Edinburgh tour, for example, is a tour that everybody can do. So you don't have to be a man or a woman. But they highlight, awesome 5, 6, 7 women for an hour and a half. So
I can vouch for it. It's a fantastic tour. And I also have the card game, just for the record. It's great. I've learned so much. Yeah.
But and I think for us, an educational purpose was to bring it to, when we talk about how we can change that conversation and we can have more women and have more role models, I think it's important to work with the younger ones and to inspire, other kids, children. And that's why it was a really good move, I think, for us now, looking backwards, to have that. And it's been quite popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Caroline, do you know of anyone who is running a women-focused or women-only tour?
So I do highlight women winemakers. That is something that we talk about in my tastings. I really focused on that in the beginning, but it really is at odds with my goal of finding a husband in the vineyards. So I've stepped away from it a little bit, but I can give you a list. But I definitely always serve at least one wine made by women, because we are also extremely underrepresented in the wine industry, and women make fantastic wine. But, one thing that I see a lot of these days in the tourism sector and travel sector is multi-day, tours and retreats. And women only experiences, by women, for women. And I actually recently, this past weekend, participated in a Provence retreat run by my good friend Colette Williams, who runs a business called Curated Health. And the purpose of this retreat was literally to ask women to have some self-care and just enjoy a week in Provence without working, without kids, with good food and slow walking in the lavender fields and sitting by the pool, because we are burned out, and we do have different expectations set upon us than men do. We have to be perfect all the time. Totally separate, but if you are a woman or women identified or a man, and you want to read a really good book called Burnout by Emily and Amanda Nagoski, and it really is particularly about women and how stressed we are when we have these insane expectations upon us. So I think there's a lot of room in the wellness travel sector for female only experiences, and that those are things that I'm also going to be leaning into more. And maybe like Women's Wine Week, where we just visit female winemakers, and that kind of stuff does appeal to me, because obviously we do need allies in men, but we also do really thrive, I think, in environments where we are having solidarity and, like Carol mentioned, safety in this particular way. I love the idea of your awesome Egyptian women tour, and I will definitely come do it one day. And I would do a multi-day trip like that, because those are stories that I'm interested. And like Zakia said, there's no statues of real women. There's statues of mermaids, and just and like in France, there might be a statue here and there, Joan of Arc, but literally there are no statues of actual real human women. They're mermaids, it's ridiculous. So yeah, I'm sick of that.
It's like there's an Egyptian feminist, Hoda Sharawi, who was instrumental, and she in the early 1900s, she arrived into Ramses Station in Cairo and took off her hijab, and that and all the women that had come to meet her, she was quite famous by then already, took off theirs as well. It's a key moment in Egyptian feminist history. Not a statue, not a museum, not anything. I would love to do a tour on her, but there is nowhere to go where you can stop there and say, and here was where she did this, except for Ramesses Station, which is not exactly ideal for a tour. So yeah, that's true. Ancient Egyptian women that became like Hatshepsut, there is plenty of stuff for them although far less than the males, I would say. But for anything beyond that, there's just hardly anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lack of representation. We see it every step of the way.
Even in statues. Yeah.
Yeah, even in statues. Mary, do you have a tour that's focused on women? Do you like particularly seek out women-run restaurants, maybe?
Yeah, we absolutely seek out women-run, minority-owned restaurants. Absolutely, every single tour includes. Probably the majority of the restaurants are women or minority-owned.
Awesome.
And we actually are working on a distillery tour, which it reminded me that has a few women distillery owners, which is super cool. And I think, one thing, it just reminds me of when we were giving a tour. One of our tours is U Street, which is basically Black Broadway, so a lot of African American and Black history. And I had one gentleman, and it is admittedly about a gentleman, or a man, but basically he came up and he said he was so excited to hear about all these other Black men on the tour that he had never heard of before. He was like, you only hear the same 5 historical African-American men in any history class you ever take. And the man's name is Francis Cardoza that we were talking about. And he's like, never heard of him. He had a huge impact on a lot of pieces of history, both DC and nationwide. And, so I think just telling stories that people haven't heard and kind of shifting that narrative of, this woman, but let's talk about these bajillions of other women, right? Is a huge piece. I want to make sure to plug definitely the tours that do strictly focus on women in DC. And one is run by Caitlin, and the tour company is called A Tour of Her Own. And they have a lot of different areas of the city that they focus on, but they've also even made a book where it's I think 111, women in DC history that you can literally stop. And there are, a few, whether it's a statue or whether it's like a plaque on a street corner or something like that, where you can literally go see it. And the other one is a little more international, but the woman who runs it is Lauren Bates, and the company's called Wild Terrains. And it is like multi-day excursions, which are all women, run by women, made for women, all of the above. And so both of those, if folks are looking, are great to look for.
I love that. I love that we can shout out some other, companies and people who are doing awesome things. So thanks for the recommendations, each of you.
I do think it's really interesting, Mary, what you said. As tour operators, we are in a position where we are capturing someone's attention, or, as guides, particularly. The guides have a moment to speak where people are listening. And so it is, even around my table when I do a wine tasting, I talk about colonialism and wine. I talk about women and wine because people are listening to me. And so I would ask the men that might listen to this podcast, and I wonder how many dudes are going to skip over this series, because they're going to think it doesn't apply to them. Yeah. But if you are listening and you're a dude, we need you to tell our stories, and people are listening, and we need you to listen to us, and we need you to talk about us.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when, for each of you that's crafting a tour that is telling the stories of women or of underrepresented groups, is it much more challenging than your normal tour itineraries and tour creation? Is there an extra hurdle that is required here?
Yes. Women drivers in Egypt, we had to, in fact, we're going to have to, we have one woman driver, but we're going to have to train more, basically. Because we have one. That's it, one in the whole of Egypt, in the whole of Cairo.
Wow. How about tour guides? Has anybody had difficulty with women tour guides?
Yeah, for us, it's also a lot. Yeah, it's difficult to recruit women. And it's probably now an 80% men, 20% women who start. So we offer our training to anyone who has experienced homelessness in our cities. Even when they don't particularly want to be guides, it's more about opening up your opportunities and building up confidence and things like that. And then along the process, then those who do want to become guides can make it known. So, but even at a pure training level, recruiting women is a lot harder. You just have to hassle a bit more, find them a bit more, but similarly, finding the content, I find, is harder than for men, obviously, because in the history books, in the statues, in the names of the streets, the women are not there. So sometimes customers will ask, why is it important that, why do you focus on women on a tour? And you say, because that information, I don't believe that information is not there. That information has been erased. So we have to work harder. Exhibitions are not about that. The statues are not, it's not because the women didn't do awesome things and didn't exist. It's just that we purposely didn't include them in the narrative. And so we just have to do more research. It takes a lot longer to build a Women of Edinburgh tour than another tour. Some would say it's a lot, it's quite interesting because it's a bit of a challenge, and that's how we try to make it sound and be. But yeah, it's the reality of it.
Yeah. Is that the same that you find, Caroline, if you're trying to find, women-run wineries?
I mean, female winemakers, that is all word of mouth. There are some networks here. I mean, there are networks now. All this stuff is pretty new. I mean, really, 30 years ago, you were not seeing that. And there are some incredible pioneering women in every region, but we're still few and far between. And it's, it's funny. I met a guy recently and I was like, oh, I really love your wife's wine. And he has his own wine. He's like, what about my wine? I was like, yeah, but I love her wine. It's better than yours. I didn't say that, but it is. No, it's a lot of it's word of mouth. A lot of it is, sometimes there are networks. I do think I would encourage all women in whatever sector you're in to join, networking, professional networking groups for your niche. So I'm in ladies wine, and there are other people in tourism in that, but it's a wine group, right? And it would be cool maybe to have a Tourpreneur spinoff group, for women. And obviously we don't want to exclude people that maybe you're not men or women, or trans community and LGBTQIA and everybody. I do think that women in general, we do hopefully have a lot more solidarity with those groups as well, and can be welcoming to them. But talk about invisible stories too. So it's there's a lot of work, there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary, have you found it to be extra challenging to find either women-run restaurants, or you mentioned the distilleries as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's like challenge accepted, I don't even think of it as like, it's just part of what we do. And so that's very literally what we're looking for. And, I say this to my guide sometimes. My goal really is to have a tour where like the name George Washington literally isn't in the script. We're not talking about it. You can go on any other tour and hear as much as you want, but whatever we can really focus on those untold stories. And but I do think, maybe it's just the DC area, but we haven't had like a huge struggle with that, which is the good news. And similarly with hiring guides, a lot of times I'll only have a recruit full of women, and then maybe the next round it's all men. It just kind of doesn't seem like there's a rhyme or reason to it here. So maybe we're kind of lucky in that sense.
Yeah, that does make it easier for sure.
Yeah, I was just the other day, I just found a female videographer, which I was really excited about, because it seems to me that the vast majority of photographers and videographers here in Egypt are men. So I was really, and her work is amazing. So, and I was so happy because she's a woman.
Yeah. And as Caroline was saying, that solidarity, uplifting other voices and making sure that we're working and collaborating with other women who are entrepreneurs or, trying to step into different industries, especially. That's hugely helpful.
Yeah. And the exchange of money, I've said this multiple times, but the exchange of money, paying that women videographer means something. It matters for us to spend our money on other women. And, Zakia, I was wondering, you were saying it was really hard to recruit, that perhaps one of the reasons for that is that stigma and shame around being homeless is tenfold for women, especially mothers. And maybe they, it is a lot harder to be open about that vulnerability because it's so scary, and that might be a part of it. It's that we have a lot of these challenges and burdens that just exist throughout. And we are at a point as leaders, as business owners, where we get to decide who gets our money. And I really do the extra work, because it is extra work, as Zakia said as well, to find these stories, like do the extra work to find a female videographer, to find female drivers, and to pay them.
Yeah. I would just, for our business, we actually, it's just a policy that we pay full price for all the food. I think there are food tour companies out there negotiating discounts, and we just wholeheartedly do not agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
They deserve every penny. The servers get 20%, we're
Yeah.
all in, you know. So yeah, I 100% agree.
And that's how you build good community too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think you said that earlier, Caroline, right? Women invest more in their local communities. So case in point right there. I love to see that. That's fantastic. Well, I just want to thank all of you for contributing, for sharing your stories, your insights, your impassioned words. You know, let's keep talking about women in the travel industry and uplifting other women who are doing awesome things, whether 3,000 years ago or today. I think it's all important. So thanks to each of you, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.